I've wanted to meet you for 22 years now, but probably longer than that. But I have always admired you, and you've been a huge part of my life. Not only because of September 11th, but I don't know if your team told you, but 2 days after September 11th, I went and got a dog to comfort me through my loss. And Andy was my fiance, who I lost in September 11th, and he forbid me to get a dog. I got a dog anyway. But about a week before Andy died, the dog, who we had only had for a month, he died of distemper. I bought him in a pet store. I was devastated. And he said, okay, after we were going to Greece, he said, after our trip to Greece, we'll get a dog. We come home from Greece. The next day is September 11th. So I had lost my dog. I lost my fiance.
Where did he work?
He worked at Sandler O'Neill.
Oh, okay.
So 2 days after September 11th, I went back to the pet store and I bought a dog who I named Rudy Giuliani. And this dog, I'm telling you, to be honest with you, was the only stable love of my life that I've had. He lasted almost 20 years.
Wow.
Yes. And so I'm going to show you a picture because
Well,
I think
good.
he's
That's
very
good luck.
handsome.
He's a lot better looking than me. Look at him. Oh, my goodness. Now,
Yeah.
What kind of dog is that?
He's a Brussels Griffon.
Yeah, looked like very smart, too.
Oh, he was.
You could see that.
Took after you, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm very honored.
Yes, of
very,
course.
very
So
honored.
anyways, I wanted to get into...
I love dogs.
Yeah, I know you do. You have one, right?
I had one. I don't
Had
have
one.
one right now, but I had one.
Okay. So I wanted to talk to you about your experience on September 11th because I feel like we obviously have that in common. We shared that day. I didn't
Right.
know you and we went through it together, but
Right.
not knowing each other. So I want to paint a picture for people that are listening right now
Sure.
or watching of what was going on in the state of New York and in New York in general, in the world, Homeland Security. Like, give us a little bit of a painting of what life was like.
Well, I mean, it was the beginning of a new administration, right? Clinton had his 8 years, and then Bush won. So we were sort of like about 9 months into the Bush administration. Things were relatively, certainly internationally, things were peaceful. They seemed to be, although Bin Laden had been causing a great deal of trouble. I don't know if we were paying a sufficient amount of attention to it.
No.
And he had declared war against us,
Okay.
which I guess we didn't take that as seriously as we should. In the city, we were going through a renaissance. I mean, we were on the cover of one magazine after another as the city that had reclaimed itself, the city that had come back. The crime was down to the lowest levels in decades.
Right.
We had gone from 1.2 million people on welfare to 500,000, most of them working. And it was a city with a tremendous amount of optimism. So I think that was a good thing, because I think if we had been where we were when I first became mayor, depressed, and 75% of the people wanted to leave the city like they do now, we'd had a harder time like dealing with it.
Yeah.
And from my point of view, I was near the end of my term. I was going to figure out what I did next after Labor Day.
Right.
Because I didn't want to spend time thinking too much or looking for a job while I was mayor, because it creates enormous conflicts of one kind or another. I had a few ideas of what I wanted to do. I had a contract to write a book,
Okay.
which was very substantial. I think it was $1.5 million or $2 million.
Right.
So I wasn't worried about supporting myself
Yeah.
after I got out. But I also was interested in I wasn't going to retire. In fact, I thought I'd work even harder
Right.
when I left. So it was about as peaceful as you can imagine. The night before it rained really hard in New York. I remember it because it was a rain out of a Yankee game where Roger Clemens was going to try to win 20 games. And I also went to a movie about Pee Wee Reese that night with Pee Wee Reese's widow and Jackie Robinson's widow.
Wow.
Because the next day we were going to raise money to build a statue of them. And went home, went to sleep, woke up the next morning. It was a beautiful day. and it was also primary day.
Okay.
So we were having our primary elections, Democratic Party, Republican Party, to nominate the candidates to run for mayor to succeed me. And the Democrat primary was kind of crowded. It was like 4 or 5 people. Republican primary were really 2 people, Mike Bloomberg, and I can't remember who was running against him. But in any event, I thought, okay, today is going to be a little bit of a lighter day in the morning. So I canceled my morning meeting that I usually had at 8 in the morning, made it for the afternoon, and I went and had breakfast with a friend, Bill Simon, and with my counsel, Denny Young, because Bill wanted to run for governor of California, and he wanted my advice. And we went to the Peninsula Hotel.
Okay. In Midtown?
We had a terrific breakfast, and then...
What time was that?
Well, I probably got there around 7:45. And then all of a sudden, as it approached 9 o'clock, one of my security people walked in and whispered to Denny Young, and Denny had a very strange expression on his face, and he said, "Mayor, I think we're going to have to leave right away. There's been there's a terrible fire down at the World Trade Center. They think a twin-engine plane hit the North Tower,
Right.
and it's a disaster."
Right.
So I got up right away. I said goodbye to Bill. He, for some reason, said, "God bless you," which seemed kind of ominous. But
Yeah.
although, because at that point, we didn't know how bad it was.
Right. Right.
And the minute I got out, I looked up and I saw a beautiful sky. And I said, well, this was no accident. So now we have a crazy person or we have a terrorist, one or the other.
Right. So I just want to say I was in Midtown also. I worked for Bloomberg News at the time. I was working on the assignment desk. Mike Bloomberg was my boss. And I went into work at 5 a.m. And the thing you remember is how beautiful that day was.
Nope, not a
not
cloud
in the sky. Yeah. And how warm it was and gorgeous. And also for regular people, it was the first day for a lot of people bringing their kids to school, which was why a lot of people were not in the building that day. Not as many as would have been. So they were running late that morning. But I went in at 5 a.m. I remember the weather like you are talking about, and I was sitting on the newsroom floor listening to what was going on. We're doing the news of the day, doing our show. We had a live show, and next thing you know, I hear somebody say, "The World Trade Center's on fire." And I remember, like you're talking about, everybody assumed and thought, and the news was reporting that it was a smaller plane, a guy who probably was out there, didn't know what he was doing,
Right.
and flew into the North Tower. So, sorry to interrupt you, but go on.
I got into my van. I sat in the back with Denny, and we started down quickly toward the World Trade Center. I tried to reach, and I was able to reach a few of police commissioner, my deputy mayor, Joe Loda, and but before I did, I could see the tower, and I could see a terrible fire, and it seemed to me it was worse than a twin-engine plane.
Yeah.
Immediately, Jenny and I both thought, I think this is worse. And I got a call. I can't remember the order in which I got them, but I got a call from my deputy mayor, Joe Loda, who told me it's a disaster down here. People are jumping out of buildings.
Yeah.
And I actually thought he maybe was exaggerating a little. Maybe he was caught up in the emotion of it. The idea of people jumping out of the building was like very hard to take.
And very hard to imagine of how awful things must have been for their choice to jump rather than
Right.
stay where they were.